He walked into the diner like a ghost, uninvited, unnoticed, forgotten. The war had changed him. The years had stripped him down to rags and silence. But she was still there. Behind the counter. Smiling at others. Passing right by him. She didn't see the man who once wrote her name on his helmet. She just saw a vagrant. But the letter in his pocket told a different story when he came home to finish. If you believe love doesn't end with distance or time, comment remember and stay to see how one forgotten soldier reminded a town what devotion looks like. Nobody noticed when the door opened. The chime above barely made a sound over the clink of coffee mugs and the shuffle of forks on ceramic plates. He stepped in slowly, carefully, as if the floor might give way. His boots were worn thin, soles patched with rubber and glue. His coat hung loose on his narrow frame, the color indeterminate from too many winters and too few washes. Gray threaded through his beard, wild and uneven. But it was his eyes that told the truth, eyes that had seen deserts, not dreams. Jack Holloway had once been the town's golden boy. Quarterback in high school. Top marks in ROTC. A name read aloud at graduation with pride. But that was 15 years ago, before Iraq, before the injuries, before the months in military hospitals that bled into years of silence. Now, he was just a man with no clear origin and nowhere to sleep. He scanned the diner briefly, not for food, but for her. And there she was. Behind the counter, tying her apron, smiling at an older customer as she refilled his cup. Same laugh, same eyes. Madison. He sat quietly in the far booth, back to the wall like he was still on patrol. No one noticed. Especially not her. But that was the plan. He hadn't come to announce anything. He came to see. To make sure she was okay. To see if she ever looked up and remembered. Jack didn't want to be seen, not yet. What he needed was time. A moment to watch, to measure, to decide if the world he left behind still had space for the version of him that came back. He had arrived in town the night before, under cover of dark and drizzle, walking the train tracks until they led to the outskirts of Hollow Creek. The place hadn't changed much. The same crooked billboard welcomed travelers, home of the brave. And of the best pie in Texas. The words used to make him smile. Now they barely registered. He slept behind the old auto shop, what used to be his uncle's garage. Curled beneath a rotting tarp, one eye open. Just like the FOBs overseas. But this wasn't war. This was something scarier. Home. And Madison, she still worked at the same place. Grady's Diner. He'd called once, months ago. Hung up after 3 rings. Couldn't speak. Couldn't breathe. Now, seated a few yards from her, he clutched the folded letter in his jacket pocket. The paper was worn, creased at the corners. Inside was the thing he'd rehearsed in his head 1,000 times but never dared to send. I'm not the man I used to be. But I never stopped being yours. He didn't know if she was married. Happy. Broken. He only knew he had to see for himself before deciding if he should leave forever, or stay and finally tell the truth. The first obstacle wasn't a person. It was time. Time had weathered his features into something unfamiliar, even to himself. The boy with the buzz cut and the steady hand was gone. In his place stood a man with sunken cheeks, deep lines around his mouth, and a scar that sliced just above his right temple, a souvenir from a night convoy gone wrong. And then there was her. Madison. Still radiant in that quiet, small-town way. She moved through the diner with the ease of someone who belonged, someone loved by the community. Everyone called her Maddie. She laughed easily. She seemed whole. She passed by his booth twice without hesitation. Didn't flinch. Didn't pause. Didn't even glance. That cut deeper than he expected. He'd always thought their bond was stronger than memory. That even if years and pain had changed him, something in her would recognize the presence of what they once shared. But how could she? The last time she saw him, he had strong shoulders and a spark in his eye. Now, he looked like someone who came in for free coffee and leftovers, just another drifter. Jack considered standing, speaking, saying her name. But fear kept him still. Not fear of rejection, but of ruining what little remained untouched between them. The idea that maybe, in her memories, he still lived as the man who left. And that memory might be the last piece of him worth preserving. The tension mounted in quiet increments. Maddie took orders. Jack listened to the rhythm of her voice. It still had the lilt he remembered from summer nights when she'd whispered dreams against his shoulder, wrapped in porch light and the smell of honeysuckle. She didn't recognize him. Not after 15 minutes. Not after 20. But someone else had. "Need something, sir?" a young waiter asked, voice cautious. Jack shook his head. The kid nodded and walked off, but not before glancing back again, eyebrows pulled tight. Jack could feel the air changing. He wasn't invisible anymore. Just suspicious. At the counter, a man leaned in close to Maddie and whispered something, jerking a thumb in Jack's direction. She looked over briefly. Just a second. Their eyes met barely. Her face didn't change. No spark. No hesitation. That second broke something in Jack. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a small, square envelope. Slid it across the table. He didn't know if he'd give it to her. But part of him needed to touch it. To feel the words beneath the paper. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. A storm was coming. Inside, Jack realized that even after everything, after sand and blood and scars, the scariest thing he'd ever done was walk into a diner and hope to be seen. He was about to leave. Fingers on the edge of the table, legs pushing slowly to stand. Maybe he'd just leave the letter and vanish, fade back into the tracks like a ghost who never came home. Then it happened. A small hand tugged at Maddie's apron. A girl, maybe 10. Brown hair in a ponytail. Eyes that looked eerily familiar. "Mommy," she whispered. "That man's staring at you." Jack froze. Time slowed. Maddie turned. Fully. Her gaze landed on Jack, and this time, it didn't slide off like water on glass. She blinked. Once. Twice. A pause. Then came the most fragile word he had ever heard, barely breathed. "Jack?" He didn't move. Didn't nod. Didn't smile. Just waited. The waitress behind her gasped. The older man at the counter turned. The young waiter dropped a spoon. Jack looked at Maddie and then at the girl beside her. His lips parted. A single question forming, unheard. Because in that child's face, Jack saw a war he never knew he'd fought. And one he never knew he might have lost. Maddie stepped forward slowly, as if unsure whether to believe her own memory. "Jack Holloway," she asked again. Not accusing. Not warm. Just stunned. He nodded once. Still silent. The diner hushed behind her, a ripple of murmurs spreading like static. Her hands trembled slightly. "You were dead," she said. "The army, they told us you didn't make it." Jack swallowed. "I almost didn't." She stared at him, eyes glossed with the edge of tears but not letting them fall. "Where have you been? All this time?" Jack opened the envelope. Slid the letter across the table. "This says it better than I can." She didn't pick it up. She was still looking at him, but now, differently. Seeing past the rags. Past the beard. The girl tugged her sleeve again. "Mama, who is he?" Maddie knelt beside her daughter. "He's someone I once loved." She looked back at Jack. "And maybe still do." Jack's heart hit his ribs. He hadn't dared to hope. But the storm outside was now inside him, raging. And for the first time in 15 years, he felt like a soldier, standing not in battle, but on the edge of being remembered. Maddie didn't finish the letter. Halfway through, her hand dropped slightly. She placed the folded page on the table, fingers resting on it like a paperweight. Her eyes weren't on Jack anymore. They were on the space between them, that quiet, painful void built over years of absence and unanswered questions. "You could have written," she said softly. "You could have let me know you were alive." Jack's throat tightened. "I didn't think I was. Not in any way that mattered." The words hung there, raw and jagged. "You left me a widow," she whispered. "I mourned you. I grieved. And then I moved on. I had to." She turned to her daughter, who was now clutching the side of her apron, confused. Jack's eyes flicked between them. The girl looked so much like Maddie, the same spark in the eyes, the same slight dimple when she blinked. But she had his nose. His quiet stillness. And suddenly the air felt too heavy to breathe. "Is she?" he asked, barely above a whisper. Maddie didn't answer. Not with words. Just a long look, deep, loaded, shaking. Then she stood. "You don't get to show up like this," she said, voice cracking. "Not after all this time. Not like this." She turned and walked quickly toward the back of the diner, her daughter trailing close behind. Jack remained seated, motionless. The envelope sat on the table. Half-read. His hands trembled. Not from anger. From something worse. Hopelessness. All around him, people watched silently, unsure whether to pity or protect. Outside, the storm had arrived. Thunder rumbled overhead. And inside, the man who had survived war now realized he might not survive coming home. The door to the kitchen slammed softly, swallowed by the diner's silence. Jack lowered his head, elbows on the table, fingers laced together like a prayer. The last 10 minutes had unraveled every silent hope he'd carried across a continent. He thought seeing Maddie again would bring closure. Instead, it opened a wound he didn't know was still bleeding. A busboy approached with a shaky hand and cleared a nearby plate. "Hey," he said quietly, "are you okay?" Jack didn't answer at first. Then, "I've been worse." He meant it. But that didn't make it easier. Just as he started to stand, a voice spoke from the other side of the diner. "You wrote her name on your helmet?" Jack looked up. It was the old man at the counter, a veteran himself, judging by the faded navy tattoo on his forearm. Jack nodded once. The man stood slowly, joints cracking. "Then you didn't just survive. You kept a promise. Most don't even try." A few other customers, stirred by the moment, stepped closer. No judgment in their eyes, just something else. Recognition. Jack didn't know what to say. But before he could speak, the bell above the door jingled again. Maddie. She walked out alone. Eyes red, face calm. She crossed the room slowly, deliberately, and stood beside the table where his letter still rested. "I read the rest," she said quietly. Jack held his breath. Her hand reached for his, trembling as it met weathered fingers. "You should have come sooner. But I can't pretend I'm not glad you did." He blinked, unsure whether to speak. Then she added, "Her name is Lily. And yes, she's yours." The name hit Jack like a thunderclap in still air. Lily. His daughter. His. He looked over at the counter where she now sat, legs swinging beneath the stool, unaware of the storm she had just calmed. She was drawing on a napkin with a crayon, humming softly. Jack's eyes welled. Not the sudden burst of tears, but a slow, reluctant flood, years overdue. I didn't know," he managed. Maddie sat beside him. "I didn't either. Not until 2 months after they told me you were gone." Jack swallowed. "Why didn't you tell me when you found out I was alive?" "Because I didn't know how," she said. "Because by the time I believed it, too much had already passed. And maybe I was angry." A pause. "I had every right to be," she added gently. "But not anymore." Jack nodded. "I understand." They sat in silence, side by side, the storm outside giving way to a light drizzle. Inside, the diner began to breathe again. People returned to meals, murmurs resumed. But every so often, someone would glance over at the man with the scarred hands and the woman beside him and understand something sacred had just been exchanged. Lily turned from the counter and ran toward her mother. "Mama, I'm done drawing." Maddie smiled. "Show him, sweetie." Jack leaned down as Lily climbed into the booth beside him. She handed him a scribbled paper. 3 stick figures. 1 tall man, 1 woman, and 1 girl with pigtails. Above it, in big looping letters, "Us." Jack couldn't speak. He simply placed his hand on the drawing and closed his eyes. For the first time in years, the war inside him went quiet. Later that evening, the diner closed early. Maddie walked Jack and Lily outside into the cool air. The storm had washed the streets clean, and the fading sunlight caught the water droplets on the window glass like tiny stars. They stood under the awning in silence. Jack looked up at the sign above the diner, Grady's. Same name. Same place. But tonight, everything felt different. "I don't expect anything," Jack said finally. "Not forgiveness. Not a place. I just needed to know I didn't imagine what we had." Maddie tilted her head slightly, watching him. "You didn't," she said. "But if you want to stay, don't make this a goodbye." He looked down at Lily, who was holding his finger like it was a lifeline. "I don't want to say goodbye again," he said. Maddie nodded once. "Then don't." She reached into her coat and pulled out a small key. "The spare room. My dad's old workshop behind the house. It's still standing, somehow." Jack stared at the key for a moment before taking it. "I'm not the man you remember," he warned. "No," she said. "You're not. But maybe that's not a bad thing." She turned to Lily. "Say goodnight." Lily hugged him, not shy, not scared, just quiet and whole. "Good night, Daddy." Jack froze. The word hit deeper than any rank he'd ever held. He placed his hand gently on her back, voice shaking. "Good night, sweetheart." 2 weeks later, the town started to talk. Not in whispers, but with warmth. The man who once walked like a ghost now fixed windows at the schoolhouse. Repaired the flagpole at the fire station. Sat at the corner booth every morning, coffee in hand, Lily across from him with a coloring book. People greeted him with cautious nods at first. Then with small waves. Then by name. Jack. Sergeant Holloway. Welcome back. He never asked for attention. He didn't talk about the war unless someone asked. And even then, he kept it brief. But he always said yes when someone needed help. Always stood when the anthem played. Always saluted the flag over City Hall even when he thought no one was watching. But someone always was. Maddie came to sit with him on the porch some nights. They didn't talk about the missing years. They didn't need to. Instead, they talked about now. About Lily's spelling tests. About the cat that kept showing up on the roof. About how sometimes, the hardest wars are the ones we fight alone and lose quietly. And then win, finally, when someone simply sees us. The diner never changed its name. But everyone started calling that corner booth something else. The home seat. Because that's where Jack had come back to life. Where a daughter met her father. Where a promise, long buried, was quietly kept. On Veterans Day, the town placed a small plaque beside that table. To those who return without medals, but carry heavier things. Welcome home. Jack read it once, then never again. He didn't need reminders. He lived it every morning, with Lily's laugh echoing through the diner, and Maddie's hand brushing as she passed behind the counter. He didn't come home looking for recognition. He came back to finish a letter. But he stayed, because it turned into something far greater. A second chance.